Hey guys, what's up? It's Jordan here. So I kind of wanted to do a review on the camera I got for my birthday. It's the Canon Rebel T7. So let's go ahead and roll the intro.
Take off.
So about a year ago, I bought my first beginner's camera. It was the Canon PowerShot SX530 HES. It was a digital point and shoot camera, so it's kind of like a somewhat beginner's DSLR. It had a lot of features that you could use. So I mean, you can set your aperture, you could set your ISO, you could set your shutter speed and all that stuff, just without the interchangeable lenses. So it was definitely a step up from like cell phone photography with a 16 megapixel image sensor, and you're able to shoot at 1080 at 30 frames a second. So probably not the absolute best, but that's kind of what I started with in this journey. So fast forward from that, and for an early birthday / Christmas gift, I got the Canon Rebel T7. So this, as far as a beginner's camera goes, in the DSLR world, which I know DSLRs are kind of getting phased out because they're not as, I would say, popular. They're pretty big, they're kind of bulky, but that's not to say that people still aren't using them. So the Canon Rebel T7 itself is a very beginner-friendly DSLR. It comes with a 24 megapixel APS-C size crop sensor. So obviously the Canon crop is 1.6. So when you're putting a focal length on any sort of lens, you have to remember that when you're purchasing lenses or when you're shooting on lenses, it's going to crop the image in a little bit. So just keep that in mind. The nice thing with this is it shoots in 1080, a very clean 1080 I might add, at 24 and 30 frames a second. It also comes with a 720p high frame rate at 60 frames a second, which isn't terrible. So I mean, this is great for anybody that's just getting into photography or videography, that kind of wants to step into something that's maybe a little bit more professional, I guess I would say. So basically with this camera, there's a whole dial full of modes. You have your manual settings. So basically manual is completely manual. You can set the autofocus on your lens. That being said, that will probably be the only thing that is automatic. Then you have your aperture value. So basically what the camera does is it sets your aperture of your lens to make everything else automatic. So in aperture value or aperture priority, you'll set the aperture value you want for your lens. So if you're trying to get shallow depth of field, you'll set your lens to, like this Canon 50 goes to an f1.8. So you can set it to an f1.8, or you can set it all the way up to an f22 if you're trying to get like a really nice clean image. Same with this is the kit lens, the 18-35. It has image stabilization and autofocus, but same thing applies. The lowest value you can go on this is an f3.5, and then it goes up from there. So that's basically what aperture priority is. You set your aperture and the camera sets everything else. TV is shutter priority. I know it seems weird. I don't know why they just didn't say, call it SV or whatever, but anyways. So basically with shutter priority, you set your shutter speed. So you use your dial to set how fast or how slow you want to take an image. So if you're trying to get motion blur in an image, you would rotate your dial to, let's say, 1/30th of a second. So it's the 1/30. Or if you're trying to get more of like a clean image, let's say you're taking pictures at your kids' t-ball practice, or your nephew and your sister wanted you to come take pictures at your nephew's soccer game. So you would set your shutter to like 1/200th or 1/500th of a second, and the camera will do the rest for you. It'll set your aperture, your ISO, and all that stuff. Now, I really haven't dove too much into any of these other settings. There's program mode, so I would think that with program mode you can set pretty much everything, which would still probably be automatic to some point, but I'm not really sure. I've never actually used it, so don't quote me on this. Then you have a full automatic mode on here, so that's the green A+ symbol on your dial wheel. Then you have no flash, so basically no flash won't ever raise the shutter, or the flash, I'm sorry, won't ever raise the flash. Then you have creative auto mode, so this is for people that kind of want to get like cool bokeh effect, bokeh pictures that don't really know how to do it too well yet. So that's always a nice feature, especially if you're trying to get into bokeh photography, or bokeh, I think it is pronounced. You know what? I believe Potato Jet had a video and somebody was on there and they said it was bokeh. It's not bokeh. So I think it's a Japanese term. Remember that. Anyways, then you have portrait mode. So basically, if you're trying to get into portrait photography, you will set your camera to that, and then basically everything's automatic. It will basically take portraits. I don't do a lot of portrait photography. I don't really know if many people would let me. Anyways, then landscape photography. So there's that mode. Let's say if you're going to like a cool national park, and you're not really sure how to get like those really nice crispy, like those really crispy images that you see on like Instagram and stuff. You can set this to landscape mode, and basically that will help you out. So let's say if you're at a national park, you go ahead and switch that over to landscape. Bam, you don't really have to do a whole lot. You're in the ballpark. So this also has a macro mode. Basically, with the macro mode, you would probably want to use something that has a short minimum focusing distance. My Canon 50mm lens, the minimum focusing distance on this is basically 1 foot. If you look at your lens, there will be a couple of numbers on here. So this is 0.35 of meters, or 1.1 feet to infinity. So that's how close and how far it can focus. Same with on like the kit lens here, it'll tell you it has a macro focusing distance, or a minimum focusing distance of 0.8. So basically that is like 3/4 of a foot. My 75 to 300, which came with my kit, this has a minimum focusing distance and a macro focusing distance of a 5 feet basically. This is my Rokinon f2.8, so this one has a minimum focusing distance of 3/4 of a foot. So if you wanted to get some wide angle macro, I guess you probably could. And I believe my Canon 24mm is probably the closest at basically like half of a foot. Alright, so next, sports photography. So this is the same thing applies to if you're doing shutter priority, or if you're doing it on auto. I'm pretty sure that you could probably do that, but I think with sports photography, this limits how fast you can set, or how fast it will set your shutter speed to. Then you have food photography mode. I don't really do food photography. I have taken some nude photos with it. Not nude like nude me, but like noodles. So there's that. And then there is night portrait mode. So Canon recommends that you use a tripod when you're using this for night portrait mode. I don't really do a lot of night portraits, but basically if you're in a low light situation and you need to get some nice brighter low light situation, you just switch it to that. And then all the way down here at the end you have your video shooting mode. So basically you get 1080 at 24 and 30, you get 720 at 60 frames a second. So if you want to get into slow motion video, you should be using that. I just made another video and I'll post it up here. Don't be afraid to use 720p at 60 frames a second. I know it's not the best, that's not full HD, but it'll get you into the ballpark when you're ready to spend a little bit more money or get a new system that has a higher quality frame rate at a higher frame rate. So like 1080 at 60 or 1080 at 120. So yeah, that's basically about it. I will say that if you're shooting stuff by yourself, like I shoot most of my videos on this, it kind of sucks, especially if you don't have a second person to pull focus. So a thing I want to add to this, if you're picking this up for vlogging, or if you're doing any sort of like video shooting by yourself, you can use the Canon Connect app. So you can download the Canon Connect app on your phone, go into your menu, go into your Wi-Fi settings, set this up, set it on a tripod, connect the app and the camera, and then you can pull focus that way. That's the easiest way I've found, besides getting a mini HDMI cable to an HDMI and setting it up to either a TV or a monitor, or purchasing an external monitor if you don't have the extra funds for that. So that's probably the best. So now let's get into some cons. I will say the few things that I kind of hate about this is the lack of continuous autofocus while video recording. So, I mean, the lack of continuous autofocus is kind of a pain. This goes back to using the Canon Connect app to pull focus. So when you're pulling focus with the Canon Connect app, if you're using the Rebel T7, you'll set your lens to autofocus, open up the app, connect the camera to the phone, tap the screen to get your focus. So like me, I'm sitting in a chair. I'll tap my phone, I'll put focus on my face, I'll get back up, and then I'll turn the lens to manual, so this way the lens doesn't try to refocus itself. So that's one of the kind of like ups and downsides to this. It doesn't have an articulating screen, so if you're trying to do any vlogging or anything like that, there's two ways to get around that. Like I said, using the Canon Connect app, or you can get a mini HDMI cable to HDMI and hook it to either like a TV or a monitor. So if you're willing to spend more, you can get the Canon Rebel T7i, or I know that Canon just came out with the new Canon Rebel T8i, so the specs on that thing are crazy, but unless you already obtain or have Canon EF lenses, you'll be spending close to $1,000 for that. Same thing with the Canon Rebel T7i. Sometimes you can find a good deal on them. If you can, buy it used, but just be aware and make sure that you know what you're getting into. So another con with this is the fact that it only has 720p at 60 frames a second. So like I said, I just made a video the other day about this, getting into high frame rate slow motion video, and I had really contemplated using it, even for just personal projects, just because I didn't like the fact that it was 720p. 720, I mean, if you've never recorded in it, I mean, go back to YouTube in 2010, 2011, when everybody was shooting on basic point and click DSLR cameras or point and shoot cameras that only had 720p, and you can see why. 720 is not the sharpest, sometimes makes an out of focus image look even worse. So that's something to consider, but I will say this, if you're just kind of doing like static stuff, you know, if you're doing slow motion, you set it up on a tripod, pull your focus, or if you're doing something with like a slider or something, that's a good way to at least get some better looking 720p slow-mo. Another downfall to this is the lack of an input jack for external audio or internal audio. So the one thing that I hated about this camera is if you're doing it and you wanted to get good clean audio, you had to go purchase an extra external audio recorder. Like, I use an H1N Zoom, so it's completely versatile. I can use it for pretty much almost anything, but it just sucks that I had to drop the extra money on buying an external audio recorder. But that's not to say that, I mean, for $110 or whatever it is, you get a really good audio recorder and you're not really breaking the bank, so keep that in mind too. Another thing is the lack, like I said, of continuous autofocus on this. So it would be nice if Canon gave you, even before shooting, continuous autofocus, or just some sort of like an autofocus in general. Besides the camera's lens that has autofocus in it. So I know some more expensive or even other Canon cameras, like the Canon SL2 or SL3, has the dual pixel autofocus, and you can get autofocus while recording, which is nice. This, on the other hand, is basically sucks, because unless you're pulling focus somehow and then switching your lens from autofocus to manual focus, you're basically just hitting the record button, walking away, and hoping that where your standing point is or your sitting point is going to be in focus. So nevertheless, there are ways around the focus system. Like I said, you can hook it up through a mini HDMI to a TV or monitor, or you can, like I said, use the Canon Connect app to pull focus that way, which is basically what I've been doing for the past 6 months, 7 months, or however long I've been doing this YouTube thing. Another thing to note, the 720p comes into factor. So really, like I said, you know, use it if you have it, just so this way you're better prepared for when you're upgrading to a better system. It kind of sucks that Canon only gives you, especially on like the lower priced DSLRs, 720p at 60 frames, but just use it. I mean, especially if you want to, like I said, get into slow motion videography and doing like cool stuff with it. Just learn how to use it, learn what works and what doesn't work. I mean, I know a lot of people will tell you that you can do a lot of stuff in post. I truly feel that if you're a master at your craft, you won't have to do too much in post. You can get it right in camera. And the one last thing I'll say about this is you're not able to set a custom white balance, as in like a slider with the Kelvin meter on it. So with the Canon series I don't know if it's the same on all of their cameras. I would imagine it's probably just on the less expensive DSLRs like the Rebel series. But let's say if you're outside and you wanted to shoot during midday, I mean, they have the automatic settings for that, so you can choose daylight, tungsten, LEDs, fluorescence, shady, cloudy, yada yada yada. But you know, coming from as a drone pilot also, I was used to on like my Spark and my Mavic 2 Pro, you can go in and you can slide a slider to get your white balance. So if you wanted to set it to 5500 Kelvin, or if you're shooting in a different scenario where you had to move it either up or down, you can't really do that with this camera, which kind of sucks. But I will say this, if you're purchasing this, and I'll do a kind of like 5 products that you should have as a beginner type thing, but purchasing a gray card, you can find them on Amazon and stuff. I would maybe look for ones that are a little bit more expensive than a cheap one, just because I've read some instances where people are buying these inexpensive gray cards and then they're not getting a true white balance from that. So a little bit of a synopsis for this. The pros on this camera are as follows. A 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. This shoots fantastic photos, and it shoots really good HD 1080p video. The Canon EF mount. So, I mean, Canon's EF lens mount is huge. You can get basically even off brands for this same mount right here. Everybody sells lenses for this. It's ridiculous. You can get any lens at any price. Buy used if you have to, especially if you want to upgrade your lens collection. So far I have 5. The 50, the 24, the 2 kit lenses, 18 to 55, 75 to 300, and then a Rokinon 10mm f2.8. I will say the cons to this are as follows: the lack of continuous autofocus, the lack of a slider for the white balance, for custom white balances, and the lack of an articulating screen. Although for the articulating screen it kind of sucks, but there are some workarounds around it. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, if you don't want to spend money on an external monitor or something, you can get a mini HDMI cable to HDMI and hook it up to a computer monitor or to a TV, or drop $200 on an external monitor for this camera. So if you've watched this far, I will be doing a giveaway. I'm going to be doing a giveaway on a photo print. So if that interests you, like this video, drop in the comments that says, please give me that print, or print me or something, just so I know that you watched this video, because I'll be doing a giveaway, like I said. If you don't follow me on Instagram, you can, because that's probably where I'll be doing a lot of this giveaway stuff from now on, is on Instagram. I've done one already. I did it for the ProScan HD 720. It was like a cheap action camera, but I gave that away. So if you want to win a free photography print, just like this video, drop in the comments, give me that print, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.